Good morning, Northside family. Thank you so much for joining us. I also want to say a huge thank you to those of you who have served and met needs throughout the past month. We have had needs come up in our community and in our church family, and you have sent diapers, you have sewed masks, you have moved furniture, you have done so many things, and we are so grateful to you. If you would like to receive the emails as needs arise and come in, you may go onto our website and click on the I Can Meet a Need button. As always, you can get any of our content for today on nbconline.net/Sunday. And we appreciate you and thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, Northside Baptist. We're happy you're here this morning. Will you sing with us? You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again to a family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Yes, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Child of God. Sing that again. You split the sea so I can walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I can stand and say, I am a child of God. I am a child of God. I am a child of God. Yes, I am a a child of God.
Well, hey, Northside, and thank you so much for once again tuning in. And let me begin just by saying, I heard so many incredible reports from this Easter. People just celebrating, whether alone in their home or with families, but incredible times of celebration. I saw a ton of our pictures posted from you guys that were amazing, and even heard of some decisions being made, and I'm so excited for each and every one. Let me also say a word of thanks to all those who helped participate in putting that together, from Andy and our sound and Patrick with video, to all those who participated with the music, and Terry and the staff. And also, I hope everyone took a chance to look at what we had available for our children as well, with Lisa's ministry and Krista's. And it was just amazing, everything that was put together. So thank you all so very much. You know, Hebrews 10:25 reminds us that we're not to neglect or to forsake the gathering. You know, as a church, as us coming together. And though right now we can't gather together, isn't it great? Aren't you so thankful that we can still gather in God's holy word through media and technology today? And we will not forsake that. We'll continue to do so up until the time that once again we can come back together as a church body. And hey, listen, we're all praying that sooner than later. Well, with that said, let me also just reaffirm what Tika mentioned earlier. A huge thank you to so many who are participating in helping out others, and lending hands, and mowing yards, getting groceries, making masks, making deliveries to hospitals. You guys are going above and beyond here at Northside in so many ways, and we are so thankful for each and every one of you, and your community is grateful for you as well. Also, thank you for those who are on the front lines, those who are keeping us safe, those who are at the hospitals and first responders. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And also for those who are in the workforce right now, who are keeping our economy going, and thank you for those that are staying locked up. You're staying in a place where you need to be, keeping yourself well, and not spreading anything to others also. You know, everybody plays a role right now, and I thank you, each and every one. And realize also, hey, listen, there are a lot of people that are hurting out there right now. And I want to encourage you even further to make sure that Northside, that our eyes are wide open. Look around for the people around you. Pick up your phone and make a phone call to loved ones or to senior adults, those in your community or neighborhood. Reach out and talk to them, or text them, or email them, or just go in the backyard and look for some neighbors. But be sure to talk to everyone. There are those that are hurting right now, those that are confused. And what an opportunity for you and for us as a church to shine the light of truth, God's hope, God's joy to everyone during this season. You know, as I think through that, there's two groups that have really been on my mind and my heart extensively this past week. And both of those groups are seniors. The first is our senior adults. You know, I know most of you, I've talked to so many of you on the phone, and you've been locked up in your home for a month now, or some of you in the place that you live, or even in a single room for a month without ever even being able to leave that place. And listen, I just want to say and share a word of encouragement to you to hang in there, to remain faithful. This will pass. We will all be together again. But let me also encourage you in this. Hey, during this time, use your mind. Be reading. Be in God's Word. Be on the internet or watching TV, but don't just sit still. Be educating yourselves through this time. Stay active, right? Be on your knees in prayer. Use this time to grow closer to the Lord, and use this time to pray for your church body, folks. Listen, we need every prayer. Let me also say this. Make sure you exercise. Work, do some things, get up, get active. Even if you're locked into a single room, do what you can where you can, but stay active. And I want to tell you why. Because listen, this is going to pass, and when it does, man, we want you back in fighting form here at the church, ready to serve, ready to participate, and ready to worship together. So please take care of yourself, and please also reach out to the church if there's anything we can do to help or to assist you in this time. Well, I said there's two groups of seniors. The first are the senior adults in our congregation and our community. But the second is our high school seniors. Now, I want to talk to you for just a moment. I know right now things are not going the way that you planned. I mean, everything you had anticipated for the final days and weeks of school, they're not happening. You're not having those celebrations at school. You likely may not have. You likely won't have a prom or a graduation, or even if you do, it'll be in a different kind of way, or even at a different time. And listen, I don't make light of that at all. Those are special times in my life, and it really breaks my heart to know that you can't participate and have those markers in your life as well. But can I tell you this? Though your class will be remembered for this, and there's no getting around that, the class of 2020 will always be remembered for the class that couldn't participate in those things. But just because your class is known for this or remembered for this, listen, senior, you are not defined by this. All right? This does not define who you are, but you have that choice to make. You can look at your circumstances and you can choose an excuse or an experience. You can choose to sit on this for the rest of your life and say, well, my excuse is I was graduating at that time and all these things were happening and I couldn't take these tests or go to these places. It can be an excuse for you. Or listen, it can be an experience. A time that you allow God to use in your life that you look back and say, I saw where God's hand took me through that, didn't want to do it, it wasn't what we had planned, but I can see His providence through it. And you can use that for an even greater purpose later in your life. Again, listen, I'm not minimizing. I know it's important, and I hate that you can't participate in those things, but it would break my heart far more if this became an excuse and a crutch throughout your life that you looked back on. No, instead, make it an experience where you say, I saw God's faithfulness here, and it prepared me for something even greater in the future. Well, please continue to join me to pray for both groups of our seniors throughout this week. And today I'm going to launch a new sermon series, and rightfully kind of tying off of that time, it's entitled Extraordinary. Extraordinary. And when you think about extraordinary people, unfortunately, generally, we don't automatically go to the patriarchs of the Bible or the disciples. We likely don't go to some of the greatest educators of our time or pastors or preachers. But when we think of extraordinary people, let's be real, let's be honest. For most of us, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Professional athletes. It's sports, and it's just the truth. Listen, I'm with you there too. And as I was thinking about this, I guess with the sudden end to our basketball season. I mean, here we are. We should be on the cusp of March Madness right now, and it just be gone and taken away from us like it has. I guess I've been thinking about basketball more. And so as I was thinking about extraordinary athletes, I began to think about extraordinary basketball players. And let me ask you a question. If I were to ask you what extraordinary basketball players come to mind, who's the first ones you think of? Who's the first people that pop into your mind? I made a little list here, and likely you'll fall somewhere in here depending on your age. Maybe it was Wilt Chamberlain that came to mind, or maybe Larry Bird. Maybe it was Michael Jordan, or maybe even Shaquille O'Neal. Maybe the King, LeBron James, or possibly even Brittany Griner. But likely, most of us had one or more of those in mind when we think of extraordinary basketball players. But what those individuals do, it's, hey, listen, or what they have done in their past, it is incredibly impressive. It truly is. But is it extraordinary? I mean, when you think about what extraordinary is what they do extraordinary? I mean, I looked at some stats here, and Michael Jordan, when he played, was 6 foot 6 inches tall, 6.5 feet. Brittany Griner is 6 foot 8 inches. Larry Bird and LeBron James are both 6 foot 9 inches, and both Wilt Chamberlain and Shaquille O'Neal 7 foot 1 inch tall. Man, they are some tall people, aren't they? In fact, I looked at Shaquille's stats, and it says that his standing reach, meaning when he is just absolutely flat-footed, doesn't leave the ground, doesn't get on tiptoes, and just reaches up, the highest point that his finger touches is 9.5 feet. 9 foot 6 inches, standing flat-footed. His max reach, meaning when he gets up, 1 foot on tiptoe and reaches with everything he's got, still keeping contact with the ground, not leaving the ground, his max reach is 12.5 feet. 12.5 feet. Now, let's put this into perspective. An NBA goal is 10 foot high, 10 feet off the ground. When I look at these people that often come to our mind when we think of extraordinary players, all this group, and they stand nearly 7 foot or better than 7 foot tall and can reach over 9 feet, Folks, is it extraordinary? I mean, they should be able to dunk the ball. In fact, if a 7-foot person can't dunk the ball, there's something wrong with them, right? I mean, that's really not extraordinary. Now, if I were to get involved, if I were to do what they did, now that would be extraordinary, right? But people at this height, with that physical stature, to be able to dunk a basketball, well, that's not extraordinary. And so with that in mind, I started thinking, okay, for me, who are those extraordinary players then? When I really boil it down to that, man, they're doing feats that nobody else could imagine. Two people came to mind very quickly. The first was a man by the name of Muggsy Bogues. Now, Muggsy was the 12th overall pick in the 1987 NBA draft. And folks, that's remarkable in itself. To just be the 12th overall pick in the NBA, that's quite a feat. Some would say that that's extraordinary. But Muggsy, taking it to a whole new level, Muggsy Bogues stood at 5 foot 3 inches tall. That made him the shortest player in NBA history of all time. Now, 5 foot 3 inches, it's one thing to make it to the NBA, but 5 foot 3? To put that in perspective, I'm not a tall person. 5 foot 3 is my chin. Just the top of my chin is 5 foot 3 inches. That's where Muggsy Bogues stood. And yet, he made it into the NBA. In fact, I have a picture here that I want to show you. And if you look at this, it's a picture of Muggsy with his teammates. And I don't think that I have to explain to you which one he is there, right, to give you an idea. But number one there, little number one for the Charlotte Hornets, at 5 foot 3, played in the NBA. Here's another picture of him to kind of reference it for you. And that's him with some of the tallest players in the NBA during his career, him being with them or guarding them. But you look, it looks like we're doing some photography, trick photography there or something. But folks, that's just him guarding those large players. That's the reference. That's how much smaller he was than anyone else. And yet, Muggsy Bogues, at 5 foot 3 inches tall, had an impressive 14-season career in the NBA. 14 seasons, 14 years at the highest level. Folks, that's extraordinary, isn't it? For a man 5 foot 3, I mean, some of you would say, okay, was he just a gimmick, right? Like you could understand he was a good basketball player in college, and there's that NBA team. They just need to get fans. They need to get some publicity, so they draft the shortest person ever, right, Muggsy. And that could happen for a year or two. But he put together a 14-season career. That's extraordinary. But what about another player? Another player came to mind for me by the name of Spud Webb. You guys remember Spud? In 1985, Spud entered the NBA draft and was selected by the Detroit Pistons in the 4th round. But what you need to know about Spud's height was only 5 foot 7 inches tall. That's right, about to my eyebrows is where Spud would come on me, just 2 to 3 inches shorter than I am. And yet Spud also had an incredible 12-year NBA career. And you say, well, man, that's extraordinary. But even more so, Spud found himself in a very unique position. You see, he was in the 1986 NBA Slam Dunk Contest. That's right, 5 foot 7, Spud Webb was in the NBA Slam Dunk Contest. In fact, I have a picture with him and his teammate, or not his teammates, but his the other competitors in that slam dunk contest. And just like Muggsy, I don't think I have to point out which one Spud is. You can see the height disadvantage that he had. But not only did he surprise everyone with his 42-inch vertical prowess, and you can see in this image, man, that guy could get off the ground. Spud went on to win the entire thing. In fact, as you look at this image, when they presented him with the trophy and the check, he was even smaller than the Gatorade company reps that gave it to him. Won the whole thing at 5 foot 7. Man, what those guys did, now that to me is extraordinary. Now listen, I'm not taking away from the work and effort that all the athletes put in. But it's true that some do stand out as extraordinary. And I think sometimes we place that tag on the wrong people. We look at the acts that they're accomplishing. We see what those 7-foot-tall players do, and we say, man, that's extraordinary. No, what they're doing would be extraordinary if I did it. But what they're doing at their height, it's not really extraordinary. Now, it is impressive, and their stature may be extraordinary. But again, if you're 7 foot tall, you should be able to dunk the ball. You see, to be extraordinary means you defy all logic. What Spud did in that competition, man, it sent everybody really. No one had seen anything like it. You say, well, David, is this a Bible study or is this a sports story? Well, let's jump in, because in this series, I want us to see how God uses and chooses absolutely ordinary people to accomplish His extraordinary purposes. And so with that said, we'll dive in. And one thing you'll notice as you look through the Bible, as you read through it, from Genesis in the very beginning of the Old Testament all the way to Revelation, the closing of the New Testament, one thing that you're going to find is that God always chooses the ordinary. He chooses the least of all. He chooses the outcast. He chooses those who no one else would give credit to. He doesn't choose the ones with great might, the mighty, the powerful, the aristocrats, the wealthy. No, God chooses the ordinary. And so for this series, I've chosen several Old Testament saints that we're going to look at as we go through this. And you say, well, why the Old Testament? Why the New Testament? Well, why not? I mean, really, honestly, the New Testament was easy pickings too, but we're going to stay focused in the Old Testament. And today we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, the first 13 verses. Let me begin reading. It says, "The Lord said to Samuel, 'How long are you going to mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, because I have selected a king from his sons.' Samuel asked, 'How can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me.' The Lord answered, 'Take a young cow with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will let you know what you're to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate to you.'" Now let me kind of paint this, give you a little historical background too. Israel had been searching for a king. You see, they saw all the other towns, cities, kingdoms around them all had these kings, these mighty kings, and they said, listen, we want one of those too. We want what they got. They've got a king, God, we want a king. They had incredible patriarchs and prophets, but they didn't have what the others had, and so they wanted a king, and they cried out, and they began to look for people that could be their king, and they found this man named Saul. And Saul, man, he looked like he fit the bill. I mean, he was everything they could have ever imagined. Striking, large, powerful, people followed him, and so they choose Saul to be their king. He was everything they ever wanted, even the prophet Samuel. But it was not who God wanted to be the king. And though Saul looked the part, you see, Saul was not in his heart the man that God wanted to choose. And, I look at this and I think, maybe sometimes this is hard for us to relate to. We think, well, we don't have a king here in America. Though there's some debate today, but we don't have a king. But, so maybe that's kind of hard for us to understand. But I wonder this. I wonder how many of us kind of in that same spirit do the same thing the Israelites did. You see, they create that perfect person or that perfect position in their mind of this is the one I want, right? And we create in our minds exactly what that should look like or who that should look like. And then we ask God, we go to God and say, listen, God, I want you to fulfill every detail of it. Every detail of my request. See, I think in our spirit, we do a similar thing often in our relationship with God. Instead of first seeking God and allowing Him to show us the plans that He has for us, we want to kind of create that person or create that position and then take it to God. And yes, we do it, don't we? We say, listen, God, this is the career I want. This is the job I want. This is the position I want. And we frame it out for God and everything. This is where I want it to be. This is where I want to live. This is what I want to get paid at. This is the kind of office I want. This is the kind of work that I want to do. And we kind of frame it out and say, God, this is the perfect position for me. Now, God, make it happen. Right? Or we do that with not only with our jobs, but we do it with people too. But what often happens is God will allow us the pleasures of our heart. And just like the Israelites, He allowed Saul to be their king. And often we'll say, God, this is exactly what I want, and we'll kind of pursue that in life, and God will let us have it. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in that perfect position, that job or that career or that place that we always wanted to be. But folks, 9 times out of 10, what happens when we get there? It's not what we thought, is it? And before long, we find ourselves in a position where we're saying, listen, I hate my job. I hate my career. I hate what I'm doing. I look around, I see what others are doing, and I say, man, I want to do what they do. Why? Because it's not what we thought it would be. But we do that with people too, don't we? With our spouses or those we're in relationships with, we'll come and we'll say, listen, this is exactly what I want. This is what I want them to look like. This is their physical characteristics. This is the demeanor I want. This is the hobbies and interests I want them to have. This is the kind of financial background I want them to have. And we'll just create that little Frankenstein of a person, right? And we'll create them exactly like we want them to be. And then we go to God with it. And we say, all right, God, this is what I want. This is who I want in my life. Now, bring that person to me, right? God, this is what I want. Now, go out there and create that person and bring them to me, Lord. And what happens? And we wait for a few days. No person, no relationship. We go back to God. God, was I not clear? This is what I want. I'm confident this is what I need. And we wait again, a few more days, right? And maybe a week or maybe weeks go by and we begin to get impatient. So what do? We go out and we find that person. We look around and we find the one. Man, this one fits the bill. They got the look we're looking for. They enjoy the hobbies and the interests that I wanted them to have. They've got that demeanor. They've got the finances. God, this is the one. I found them for you. God, you don't have to create them anymore. This is the one. Now, make that person love me. Right? God, this is what I want. Now, make that person love me. You remember a few weeks ago, we were in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Solomon, who was the wealthiest and not only the wealthiest but also the wisest person ever to live, interestingly also the son of David, who we're going to look at in just a moment. But Solomon said this, he said, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways know Him, talking about God, and He will make your path straight. Solomon said this, listen, don't rely on what you know. We do that. Just like Israelites, they said, we want a king. That's what we know we want. And this is what we believe he should look like. And that's what we do sometimes with careers, with jobs, relationships. We say, this is what I want. This is what I know, and this is what I know I want. Now, God, make that happen. And Solomon gave us great caution about that. Remember, he said, listen, don't rely on what you know. Don't rely just on what you understand, but trust in God. Trust in the plans that He has for you. He says, in all your ways, know Him, acknowledge Him, walk with God always, and He'll make your path straight. Solomon said, listen, to trust in God is to rely on His sovereignty for your life and everything. Not what you know, not what you understand, not even what you can see, but total dependence on a sovereign God in everything. And for most people in this world today, man, things aren't going the way we wanted, right? Everything we know has fallen apart, right? I mean, everything we had planned, we talked about the poor high school seniors. Listen, this is not what anyone imagined. And if our whole world revolves around what we know and what we experience, and folks, it's crashing down. But if our trust is in the bedrock relationship with the God of the universe who has a beautiful, extraordinary plan for our lives, then just like I said to the seniors, you can look back on this time and say, God used this time in my life to prepare me for something even bigger later. Again, not minimizing, but to say, when I thought that I needed that prom or I needed that graduation or I needed these scores or I needed these things, and yet, fast forward 5-10 years, and I see God still worked everything out in my life. Now here I am as a much older adult, and I'm going through even more difficult things. That my marriage isn't what I thought it would be. My career is not what I thought it would be. I can't have the children that I thought I could have. And yet I can go back to that time in 2020 and see where God's hands, God's sovereignty walked me through that. And so I'm prepared for where I am today. You see, that's what walking with the Lord is. That's what trusting in God is. Not on what we know and understand, not on what we want to create for our own lives, but the plans and purposes that God has for us, the extraordinary plans and purposes. So let me get back in the story then. So now they have the Israelites, they have the people's choice, right? Saul. And yet, though he looks the part, he's further rebelled against God. And so God calls out to Samuel and tells him, listen, I'm going to show you the king that I've chosen. God says, I've got a man. and he's going to be the king of Israel that I choose, and I'm going to lead you to him. But look at the first thing God says to Samuel. He says what? Stop mourning. Stop. You're all tore up. You're all worried about this. That's not the one I intended anyway. You know, I wonder if sometimes we do. I mean, Samuel was a great man of God, a great man of faith, and yet mourning because he didn't understand God's will. He didn't understand the plans that he had for him. And I wonder if there's things in our life today that we're mourning. I wanted that, and I didn't get it. I had this, and it got taken away from me. I was going there, but now that's gone. I wonder if there aren't things in our life that's not going the way we want it, but all along God's saying, listen, that's not what I had intended for you anyway. That's not what I had purposed for you. I have something far greater. You know, I know for many of you right now, maybe you're going through a job transition or just a flat-out job loss. You don't even know where you're going to transition or how that's going to look like. But you know, friend, maybe, just maybe, God's saying, listen, you know that job that you thought was great? Now, maybe when you had it, you may not have thought it was as great as when you lost it. We appreciate things a lot more then. But as great as that was, I've got something even greater for you. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe God's taking us through this time, but He has an even greater plan, an even greater position for you on the other side. These people, they complained to God that they wanted a king, and then they got the man that they thought they desired. But because he wasn't who God desired, though he looked extraordinary, he led them away from the Lord, turning them from God. You know, here's the point. Saul would never, ever be able to accomplish God's extraordinary purposes for the Israelites. He was the wrong man. Their choice was the wrong choice. So God sent Samuel to Bethlehem to select a son of Jesse to be king. Now, when you read this, or when I read this earlier, maybe that rings a bell to you. Going to Bethlehem for a son of Jesse to be a king, right? It sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, it should, because God would eventually send His Son, Jesus, in that same tiny, ordinary little town of Bethlehem, to come from that ordinary line of Jesse. Man, isn't it amazing to be able to look back and see how God's plan lays out? Now, the Israelites, they didn't know that was coming. But we have that great blessing to be able to look back in the historicity of the Bible and see, man, God had a plan. And folks, isn't God's plan worth waiting for? I mean, when you're able to fast forward and see how it ends, you think, man, why didn't they wait? It was worth waiting for. They jumped onto Saul. They should have just waited for David. But how often are we guilty of that same thing? Friends, be willing to wait on God's extraordinary plans for your life. Let's keep reading, verse 4. Samuel did what the Lord directed and went to Bethlehem. When the elders of the town met him, they trembled and asked, "Do you come in peace?" "In peace," he replied. "I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. You see, when Samuel shows up on the scene here in Bethlehem, and here he is with this young cow, it says that the elders literally trembled. Man, I mean, they were torn up at the sight of Samuel. Why? You have to understand, Samuel was the Levitical judge. He was the mighty prophet of God, right? And so when he shows up in town, man, it's like Texas Walker Ranger is on the scene. You know, I mean, everybody's scared. He always wins the fight, right? Everybody's fearful of him. The ranger is there, and that's kind of the feeling they would have. And so with him showing up, not only is the law in town, but it says that he showed up with a young cow. You see, showing up with a sacrifice, they would have assumed that something bad had taken place. There was a sacrifice needed for an atonement of sin. And since it was Samuel that was coming, it had to be some grievous act. I mean, it had to be some act of murder. And so when he comes, they're all looking around like, my goodness, who's guilty? What has someone done? What have we done? What could possibly happen? It says that he immediately tells them, listen, go now and consecrate yourselves. And that means prepare yourselves to participate in this act that we do before the Lord, this sacrifice. For them, that would mean that they would literally have to go home and bathe, and not only bathe, but put on their clean clothes, and they could have no contact with a dead person, that they could engage in no sexual activity. There's this long list of everything they had to do just to prepare to participate in that time. Isn't it amazing to see the reverence that the people of the Old Testament had for God? I mean, the reverence they had. And listen, I don't want to make you feel bad because you're sitting there watching me right now in pajamas eating flapjacks. Right? I'm not going there. I'm not even going to say anything about that, right? Don't feel bad at all. You just keep eating. You don't put your clothes on. Just, do your thing. But all jokes aside, they had such a reverence for the Lord, to put on their best, to clean themselves, to not defile themselves or their neighbors, just to come into the presence of God. And it goes on to say that he purposely made sure that Jesse and all his boys would be in attendance. Let's read on, verse 6. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and said, "Certainly the Lord's anointed one is here before him." Verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or his stature, because I have rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart." Jesse called Abinadab and presented him to Samuel. "The Lord hasn't chosen this one either," Samuel said. Then Jesse presented Shammah, but Samuel said, "The Lord hasn't chosen this one either." And so we see this parade, if you will, but they bring up all of the sons, the oldest, the biggest and best looking first, Eliab. And Samuel sees him, and even Samuel, though a man of God, says, "Man, that's got to be the one." I mean, this was a big, good-looking joker, right? And Samuel says, "That's got to be him." And just as he's pulling the cork off that horn, man, he's ready to pour oil all over this poor kid. Verse 7 tells us that the Lord jumps in and says this, "Do not look at his appearance or his stature, because I have rejected him." He says, listen, humans do not see what the Lord sees. For we see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart. Man, that's a great one to highlight or underline in your Bible. Everybody else looks on the outside, but God looks on the inside. God sees the heart. Man, aren't you thankful for that? Aren't you thankful that God sees what's inside of us, who we really are deep down, and the potential that we have in Him? I see so many reports right now and documents and, oh man, God, my goodness, the infomercials that are out right now during this coronavirus, right? And they're all geared to what? Like exercise equipment, skin care, do your own hair kits at home, all this because people can't go out. But so much of it is focused on appearance. Why? Because we're just surrounded and consumed with narcissism, aren't we? Just worried, what do we look like? What do others think about us? How do we view ourselves? But what is our outside appearance? We're so concerned on what's on the outside, but aren't you thankful God isn't? He doesn't care. He doesn't care what you look like. He doesn't care what you're wearing. He doesn't care what abilities the world thinks you have. He looks inside. He sees down deep into the heart and soul that He created. The breath that is in your soul came literally from His mouth. God sees the inside and loves you unconditionally. He then brings up the next brother, Abinadab. Nope, not that one either. Well, maybe Shammah comes in and nope, not this one either. Let's keep reading verse 10. After Jesse presented now 7 of his sons to him, Samuel told Jesse, "The Lord hasn't chosen any of these." Samuel asked him, "Are these all the sons you have?" "Now they're still the youngest," he answered, "but right now he's tending the sheep." Samuel told Jesse, "Send for him. We won't sit down to eat until he gets here." So Jesse sent for him. He had beautiful eyes and a healthy, handsome appearance. Then the Lord said, "Anoint him, for he is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on David from that day forward. Then Samuel set out and went to Ramah. So we have this picture right there. All the other seven sons of Jesse all paraded in front of Samuel. And like I said, the biggest and the best looking first, all the way down to the last. And yet all of them pass by. And Samuel, as they're coming by and they look great, he's only got one rose, right? And it's not this one, and it's not that one. And all 7 pass, and God says, "No, not even the last one. And we look at this and we think, man, here David's getting looked over. I couldn't help but have that flashback of 7th grade PE in junior high, right? Like you're in there with all the 8th and 9th graders and me anyway. I was the littlest kid around, right? And then it was the pickup game, right? What do? You divide up, right? The two captains, everybody picks, and you're the last one. And not only are they, oh yeah, good, we get David. No, it's like, oh yeah, okay, there's no more picks. All right, Bramble, you're over there, right? You're not going to see the ball anyway, right? But that's kind of the picture that he gets. Like everybody's just kind of looking over him, right? It's like gym class all over again. Everyone came out. They're all there in their Sunday best to participate in this sacrifice. And man, David didn't even get invited to the party. He wasn't consecrated. He wasn't even there. They had to go and get him. As they do just that, they send for this youngest son, David. Now, the Hebrew word for youngest, katan, right there, is the Hebrew word. And what it means, and where you see it throughout Scripture, it means smallest, or really it's translated runt, the runt of the family, the runt of the litter, the smallest of all the brothers. And yet what we saw prior to this text in chapter 13 and verse 14 says that God said that this king, talking about David, would be a man after God's own heart. And just prior to this, in chapter 15 and verse 28, that he would be even better than Saul. You see, God had chosen David from eternity past. Before he was ever born, before his life, before his eyes and his body ever saw the light of day, God had chosen him. You know, I can't help but notice here, and maybe this is a good word for someone today, but you notice how there were 7 no, not this ones from God before he ever said, this is the one? 7 good-looking, strapping men that almost everyone else would choose for a king. 7 of them had to pass by, and God said, no, not this one, not that one, not even that one. 7 no's before he finally said, that's the one. You know, I think there's a lot of people out there that are willing to settle for 2 or 3 because they don't think 4 or 5's coming, let alone 6 or 7. You know, maybe that first job, that first career, that first college, that first degree, that first relationship, whatever it is, maybe that's not the one God intends for you. 7 no's before the final 8th yes. And David wasn't the people's choice. He isn't what they had imagined. It says that he was healthy and handsome, and that sounds great. But the Hebrew word, again, for healthy, admoni, and it's translated in a lot of other translations of Scripture, ruddy. And it means red, that he had kind of a red appearance to him. It's the same word they used when Esau was born. He was covered in hair and red and everything, but that same appearance. Now for David, that was likely because he had been out in the fields as a shepherd boy for so much of his life, and his skin was like leather, right? He was red from the sun, and likely he was dirty from being with the sheep as well. And so I look at this, and you can't help but notice how the world, and even David's own family, defined him. He was young. He was the runt. He was the least of all the brothers. He was a shepherd. He was baby-faced and even ruddy, even sun-scorched and dirty. But how did God define David? He was the chosen king. He was a man after God's own heart. And I get to this point, and we have to ask ourselves that question. Folks, how do you define you? Kind of like they did with David, by your job, by your appearance, what you look like, or maybe by your family. You know, we so often do that. People ask about you, and you'll tell them about your kids or your parents or your grandparents. Or how do you define you? And even more importantly, friends, how does God define you? How does the one who created you, the one who gave you the breath of life, how does he define you? You see, here's the thing. The main character of this true story, it's not Saul. It's not Samuel. It's not even Jesse. And believe it or not even David. The main character in this story is God. God is the main character. Why? Because he wants us to understand that his will is supreme. His will is best. And his will for your life is extraordinary. David showed up directly from the field, likely dirty and stinking like sheep. Everyone else is there in their Sunday best, and yet in God's eyes, he was beautiful. I couldn't help as I read that, but think back also in the New Testament when Jesus encountered Simon. He looked at this man and said, "You're Simon, son of John." An uneducated, likely stinky, dirty fisherman. He was right there at his fishing boat. But Jesus looked at this Simon and he said, "But you're now Peter. I see you as a rock and the leader of the church." Folks, how does God see you? How does God see you? Can I tell you something? If you've received the gift of salvation, you're redeemed. You're beautiful. You are worth dying for to God. And He has an extraordinary plan for your life. All you have to do is trust in Him. I'm going to close with this, and this is very much a countercultural statement. Are you ready? I'm closing, I promise. Very counterculture. Let me tell you something. You are ordinary. You're ordinary. So am I. Oh, and take heart, by the way. James 5:17 says that the great Elijah was an ordinary man too. You see, the world wants to tell you that you're special. You're unique. The world wants to tell you you're Saul. And maybe that's your pursuit in life too, that you're striving, you're doing everything you can to be Saul, to be heads and shoulders above everyone else. But God says, listen, just be the ordinary you, and I'll make you extraordinary. Folks, regardless of what's happening right now, God has an extraordinary plan and purpose for your ordinary life. But if you never trust Him with your life, and if you don't walk daily with Him, you'll never know what it is. You're extraordinary in God's eyes. Let's pray. Father, we love You and just thank You for our opportunity. That we don't have to forsake gathering. God, we can come together through social media, through technology, through TVs and phones and everything else right now. And God, we thank You for that. And Lord, I pray that everyone right now that is praying wherever they are, Lord, that asking them that question, Lord, how do I view myself? But more importantly, God, how do You view me? Lord, I pray that You'll speak to every heart and let each and every person know the breadth and depth of the love that You have for them. And God, help us with the breath of life that You give us to exercise the love that we have for You in sharing and showing the good news of Jesus. And it's in His name we pray. Amen. Hey, thank you so much, Northside. Listen, I'm hoping in the next few days we're going to have some information talking to you about when we're going to come back together, what that's going to look like. So stay tuned, and I look forward to seeing you next week. God bless.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow, the sun forbear to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine, will be forever